Yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you. So good morning, good Yontif. So I was pre-med in college until I took a class. And then I became a Jewish studies major and art history. But I always think the first time I put my kittle on for the high holidays, it's sort of like the white jacket ceremony, except not. You know, people ask me, do I still get nervous about the high holidays? This is my 35th year leading high holidays. And the answer is yes. Yes, very nervous. Fortunately, I have the range of facial expressions of a cat, so it doesn't really show up. But I do get nervous because this matters. This is a really important place, as Joyce talked about. And please feel free to come in. You're going to have to be in the front row, but please feel free to come in. But this is a very important place, and I do not take it for granted. So I am very glad to be able to be here to celebrate the holidays, just celebrate being together. Now, over the last few years, I would be very sad when the Amazon truck or the FedEx truck just drove past the house, even if I hadn't ordered anything. Every now and then I would just look at the porch waiting for something to magically appear. Figure if I walked past it enough, something would show up. And I would keep asking Ruth, do we have enough? Whatever that thing was. And Ruth was like, we don't even use that. It was a lot like being married to a 6-year-old during COVID. And part of this was, I don't think I was the only one who was feeling it. There were a lot of issues, it felt like, with the supply chain. That everything seems to have just kind of broken down, that there was too much of some things, not enough of other things. Just give you one benign example. At one point, we had 2 rolls of toilet paper. We had 500 rolls of paper towel. Now, in some ways, these products are similar. But in other ways, they are not. And there were obviously far more serious shortages as well. And you never really knew what was going to happen. You didn't know what was going to be at the grocery store. And people had different approaches when they would go to a store. If there were 2 things left of something, people would say, oh my God, there are only 2 things left, I better grab both of them. And other people who said, oh my God, there are only 2 things left, I better leave one for someone else. I think these last few years revealed a lot of things about ourselves. But one of the most important things I think we learned about this is that we're just so interconnected. We're so interdependent. No one can be completely independent, completely on their own. We are all vulnerable to a supply chain, which when it's broken, creates a lot of panic, it creates a lot of anger, it creates a lot of frustration, and it creates instability. And when the world feels unstable, we are not always at our best. And I was thinking during this time that we really need emotional and spiritual and physical supply chains, that we need to find a way to stay connected. Because if we don't, things are just going to get worse and worse, more and more disconnected, not only from each other, but from our own selves. And when that happens, it gets very dangerous. I think that we have to find a way to keep connected in a way that brings us joy, brings us meaning, and helps us take care of other people as well. And I think one of the first things we need to do is ask ourselves, what in our lives is broken right now? What is it that no longer feels connected? Maybe it's people that we don't feel connected to anymore. Maybe it's situations we don't feel connected to anymore. And to think about what is our role in relationships that feel broken, that no longer feel connected in the way that we used to be. Because we are really created to need each other. And this can be really scary. Relying on other people can be frustrating. Loving other people can be scary because sometimes the love doesn't last. Sometimes the person doesn't last and things change. And we're feeling very vulnerable and we're feeling very scared. And we don't always handle it in really good or really healthy ways. We take it out on people who we say we love, but when we're not at our best, we don't treat them in the way that they should be. Now, Brene Brown talks about the importance of understanding how vulnerable we are. And she says that vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Vulnerability is not weakness, it's our greatest measure of courage. Instead of pretending that we can handle everything, being able to admit that this is just really hard, I think will give us more strength and requires a lot of courage to do. There's a lot of anxiety. I don't think it's me. Am I the only one here who the last few years has been a little bumpy? Is anyone here fine? Anyone okay? So if you tell me your anxiety, I can probably tell you your age. And a lot of it really is generational. If you are old enough to either remember the Holocaust, you have a connection to a survivor, maybe even remember the Great Depression. If you remember before there was a state of Israel, if you remember Father Coughlin of blessed memory. Can you hear me? Can you hear me down there? I hope he brought an air conditioner with him. But if you remember that, you have a different kind of anxiety about anti-Semitism. You have a different kind of anxiety about the state of Israel and how vulnerable it is. If you're of a certain age, Israel was David. But if you're another age, it became Goliath. It's where your memories begin. If you remember when Jews only being vulnerable, if you remember that there were quotas, if you remember how dangerous it was for Jews in certain places, if you remember Jews after the Holocaust having nowhere to go, if you remember the Jews in Europe in the 30s and having nowhere to go, you have a different level of anxiety and a different level of fear from people who are younger, who only remember a strong state of Israel, who only remember Jews being able to function in society, but have different concerns as well. Younger generations are very worried about, are they going to be able to afford a place to live, to raise a family? What kind of climate are they going to be in, both politically and environmentally? How much control are they going to be able to have over their own body and their own ability to decide what kind of families they want? How safe are they within the identities that they choose to present the world? These are real. The anxieties of the older generations are real. The anxieties of the younger generations are real, but something is broken in between. One generation thinks the other doesn't care about this. The other generation doesn't think the other generation cares about that. And so what we do is we stigmatize or demonize each other instead of really just listening deeply to each other and that the pain that we're all in. We have to be responsive to each other. We are all we got. When I talk about the supply chain, what I really talk about is the door-to-door chain, the generation-to-generation chain, the things that connects us as a people, the thing that has connected us over time. Each person is entitled to decide how they want to relate to each issue. I tell you, yelling at someone over not being a Zionist doesn't help. First of all, it doesn't turn them into a Zionist. Yelling at someone saying, oh, you don't care, nothing matters to you except what matters to me, that doesn't help. We have to find a way to tell each other's stories, to explain each other's anxieties of why we're feeling what we're feeling. Because if someone cannot show up fully as who they are, and if they show up knowing that you don't love them for that, it's going to be really hard. And it creates a break, and it creates distance, and it creates anxiety. Being able to tell your story, being able to share what matters to you is maybe one of the greatest ways that we can create connection to each other. I mean, it's one of the things, Ruth and I, we met, and we got engaged 6 weeks later. And then immediately afterwards started dating. And it worked out pretty well, right? Okay. Just checking. But we were able to share each other's stories. We were able to understand each other's anxieties. My father was a survivor. My in-laws were survivors. We understood why we needed passports, even though we weren't going anywhere. We got passports not to travel, but to flee if necessary. But we understood that with each other. Do your loved ones understand you? Are you sharing what matters and what scares you the most, what you love the most, what matters? That's part of how you create these chains. This is how, when you share your story, it becomes the story of other people as well. Don't be afraid to share what scares you. What, was that the alarm I set going off? Or? I'm always worried about not talking long enough. Not sure that's an anxiety any of you are sharing at the moment, But Judaism really does have a method of helping us share our concerns, share our anxieties in a way that builds strength, that builds understanding. The Passover Seder. If you think about the Passover Seder, it was about our lives were scary. We were enslaved. We had no control over our lives, but we found the strength to go forward. It's not just a history lesson, that's an opportunity to share what in your life in this moment scares you. I can guarantee you that if you're dealing with a lot of anxiety and fear, your family already knows. What they don't know is why. And when you don't know why, your imagination runs away with you. It's not weakness to be vulnerable. It's a kind of strength. And by the way, I'm sharing this with you because I'm learning it as I go. This is all kind of new for me as well, of being able to admit what scares me, what makes me nervous, because I was kind of raised, you've got to be strong all the time. And it's exhausting. Anyone tired here from just having their cape tugged at all the time? Could you ever wish you can say, I can't? I love you, but I can't, or this is why I'm afraid, and I don't always act skillfully because I'm afraid. There's a lot I'm afraid of. I'm afraid for my girls and their families. I'm afraid of anti-Semitism resurging. I'm almost done, really, I promise. Just kidding, I'm not. I'm just flipping pages at random. I'm not even looking. I'm afraid of what world they're going to grow up in. I mean, they're already adults. I'm afraid of what world I'm growing up in. I'm worried about the environment, but I am worried about anti-Semitism. I am worried about Israel. Though I am so grateful to be able to be worried about Israel. Every Jew who came before us would have loved to have argued over Israel. And that is a gift, even when Israel is not perfect, to have it. When I think about where my in-laws could have been, where my father could have gone, instead of everything they went through. Don't tell me that anti-Semitism began with Israel. It was kind of bubbling up before then. Right, Father? So we have rituals that connect us. When we make Kiddush, when we say that today matters, we say Kiddush on Shabbat. Say, this time is so precious, the only people on earth I want to be with right now are at this table. And you have my full attention. Shabbat is when we say the people who matter to us the most are the ones we actually act that way toward them. We have the mezuzah on our doors to remind us of our values when we go into the world, but also to remind us that when we come home, to not take our day out on our day from the world out on the people inside. So many people are at their best at work and at their worst at home, and that is not the way that really is a healthy approach to things. I mean, you shouldn't be at your worst at work either, because you'll be spending more time at home. But if you are bright and shiny at work, be bright and shiny at home as well. Prayer is about finding yourself. It is about reconnecting to yourself. In fact, the word for tefillah, lahit palel, to pray, means to look inside, to find yourself and not be afraid to find what's within. I think it's worth spending a moment thinking about who are the people in your lives, and do they nourish you or deplete you? Arthur Brooke has a great expression. He said that when it comes to friends, we have either deal friends or real friends. And deal friends are ones that, maybe they're fun to do things with, or maybe you're friends because of business or because of work. And we tend to have a lot of deal friends. Real friends are rare. Real friends are where you share values, where you can share what scares you, you can share what matters, you can build toward something that's meaningful. And those are really hard. And so it's worth asking yourself, in your life, are you spending more time with your deal friends, or are you spending more time with your real friends? And maybe to start thinking about where to spend that time instead. Anthony Hopkins has a wonderful article called "Let Go of People Who Aren't Ready to Love You Yet." Now, taking relationship advice from Hannibal Lecter, I know sounds kind of funny. But he said, stop hard conversations with people who don't want to change. Stop showing up for people who are indifferent to your presence. Stop loving people who aren't ready to love you. Because if a relationship, if all it had was the energy that only you gave, it's not love, that is attachment. You are not responsible for saving people. You are not responsible to convince them to be saved. You have to realize that you are the loved one of your destiny and to accept the love that you think you deserve. During these last few years, there's, I think, really been an opportunity to think about not just what's broken in our lives that we want to repair, but what is broken because it just came to an end. Friendships, even connections with family. If a family member is really unhealthy for you, it's okay to not spend your precious time and energy on that person. We each only have so much. And if being with that person makes you feel more broken than not, it's time to think about things. There was a great country song, one of the lines was, "I'm so lonely, it's like having you here." And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that as well. I am so grateful for the Jewish community because it's allowed these connections even when we are not perfect. And a Jewish community is a very complicated thing. A lot of organizations, a lot of disorganizations, and one or two opinions on what those things should be. And we are not a perfect community, but we are a beautiful community. We are, as Brett Goldstein, who's in Ted Lasso, we are essentially how he described the Muppets. Anyone, do I need to explain who the Muppets are? Waka, 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 are we good? Kermit, Miss Piggy. Well, we don't talk about Miss Piggy on Yontif. So Brett Goldstein said the secret of the Muppets is that they're not really good at what they do. Kermit's not a great host. Fozzie is not a great comedian. They're really not great at what they do, but they love it. And they're like a family, and they like putting on a show, and they have joy, and because of the joy, it doesn't matter that they are not good at it. So what we should all be like, according to him, is we should be Muppets. And I love that idea because we will never connect to each other when we just think of ourselves as perfect or that the other person needs to be perfect. And we can't have a relationship until they fulfill every single one of our needs. If you are perfect, it means there's no room for anyone else. If you are a glorious mess, there is plenty of room. Just understanding, though, that it's going to stay a mess, it's just going to be your mess. And you should love it, and you should appreciate it for what it is. If you wait for things to be perfect, you will be waiting for the rest of your life, and then you will have missed your entire life. The world is not going back to the way it was. I think it's fantastic that so many of us are together today. Some things that are broken are going to stay broken, even though you would like it to be different. But this is an opportunity for us to really think about what are the connections that we want in our lives. What are the bridges that we're willing to cross in order to connect to what matters most? And what are the bridges that we don't need to cross anymore, to say that we need to make sure that we ourselves are safe, that we ourselves are taking care in a way that is good for us and for those who love us. The more we tell our story instead of yelling our story at others, the more people will understand us, the more people will connect to us, the more we listen deeply to the stories of others, of what scares them and what matters, the more we're going to be able to keep that chain of the generations intact, the thing that has kept our community together for thousands of years. I became a rabbi because I refused to give up on this. I refuse to give up on our people. I refuse to give up on what our people can do for the world. And I refuse to say that things will never be better. I have decided that I am only going to live with hope, okay? Not with promise and not with belief, but with hope. That's what faith is, when you keep trying to do your best, even though you don't know what's going to happen. And I will live with this trust and this hope that every generation of our people will rise to the occasion and that we will be okay. We can be each other's supply chains. We can be each other's bridges to a better day. Shana Tova.